thank you very much for being here this evening. On behalf of the Facilitation Review Committee, I'd like to thank the Board of Education for the opportunity that you presented to us on this charge. As Steve mentioned, this was a long road. It was a lot of hard work. It started back in November with this group made up of 12 community members, including some teachers. Several are in the room with us this evening: Janet Chipman, Richard Johnson, Tony Perkins, Jim Chelsvig, I see Elizabeth Becker, Mary Ferguson, and myself, and Gary Haddon were the co-chairs of the committee. It was our honor, it was our privilege to be part of this process, and we were grateful that the members of our committee embraced this process, and even more grateful that the community embraced the project. They engaged in the project. And we're here this evening to present a recommendation to the Board of Education from the hard work that all these members added to this program. The charge that we were given by the Board of Education was a community-based coalition of community members, and a recommendation for the most effective long-range plan is what the Board of Education, what you wanted us to provide. The recommendation to the school board will balance needs across the community, follow a thorough cost and educational value analysis of improvement scenarios, minimize the disruption of the education programs, students, their families, again, minimize the interruptions. Also to provide for effective and efficient use of our resources, to prepare district students for an evolving work environment by providing 21st century classrooms, which we feel for the educational adequacy of our children is utmostly important. And we also wanted to include what steps were needed to be taken to accomplish this plan. Facilitation team, again, was made up of community members. We also had staff representatives from School District 117. Steve Potasic was also at our meetings. We also had board liaisons. So members of the Board of Education, Kathy Mall was with us, as well as Mike Lonergan. And we appreciate their input and the time that they spent with this committee. Facilitation Review Committee had 9 separate meetings. We also held 4 community engagement sessions. And Mary's going to go through what the community engagement sessions were all about.
Thank you, Mike. Please bear with me. This will be a very quick recap and reminder of this highly organized process. When Steve said, you know, can you get this done in 15 minutes, that meant that we had like 17 seconds per slide. So strap on those seatbelts. Here we go. Meeting number 1 was an orientation meeting where we on the committee essentially came to understand what this citizen-led process involved. And at that meeting we determined our activities, set a pretty aggressive timeline, and then assigned responsibilities. The process, just to remind folks, for developing a facilities master plan basically answers 3 overarching questions. Where are we now? Where do we want to go? And how in the world are we going to get there? Facilitation team meeting number 2, which occurred December 17th, and spoiler alert, I'm trying to let people know where we have a typographical error. There's one on this slide. Facilitation team meeting number 2 is where we learned the results of the facilities assessments, which was done by our professional consultants in a very, very limited time frame. There were 2 kinds of evaluation that were performed that we reviewed at this meeting. The first was a physical building condition review, and the other was an assessment of functional or educational adequacy. We learned at that meeting essentially that the district maintains facilities that are safe, but that our buildings are comprised of systems that have varying lifespans, as these slides show. And many of our buildings are in need of significant investment to address that physical deterioration that was evident in this review. The next chart, the one that says cost per square foot, shows that the costs over the next 20 years to address the physical needs for each of the buildings on a square foot basis is as is shown here. Please note that the high school, which is in the right-hand side there, shortest column on the bar chart, has the highest overall cost simply due to its sheer size, but it has the lowest cost over this time frame per square foot. Simply put, the high school is in the best condition of any one of the district's facilities, this review showed. Costs illustrated on this chart are simply to repair existing physical deficiencies and to meet minimum code compliance. There are no costs on this chart included to address functional deficiencies. What this does is simply the cost to maintain these facilities. The second component of assessment was the functional or educational adequacy evaluation. Essentially, this is an understanding of how well our facilities function as schools. In other words, can teachers teach effectively in these buildings, and can our students learn effectively in our facilities? The results of that functional or educational adequacy assessment is shown in this chart. Please note that only the high school, which is over to the far right, reached the satisfactory category. All our other schools fall in the borderline category. At Community Engagement Session number 1, the results of these assessments were presented to community participants. And at that meeting, we worked to understand the community's prioritization of these needs. This is the where we are meeting in the process. We had a great turnout in mid-January. To maximize community participation and input, we asked attendees at this session and the rest of our sessions to break into small groups to put together their thoughts and tell us what their goals and findings were. The key findings that came out of this particular meeting were the group's recommendations for highest priority of physical needs to be addressed. First was building infrastructure. In other words, the heating, air conditioning, plumbing, and electrical work. And for one, I'm grateful that the AC is working today here. Number 2 on that priorities list was building envelope. In other words, the roof, the exterior walls, windows, major concern to the attendees at that meeting. And third on that list of priorities, educational efficiency. The top functional needs that were prioritized at CES number 1 were ability to provide technological access or technology access, the ability to control access to our schools, in other words, to create and maintain a secure environment for students and staff, and third, facility accessibility to meet ADA and IAC requirements. Our third meeting of the facilitation team took place a week later. We essentially summarized the input that we received from the public at CES number 1 and then prepared very quickly to step into CES number 2. This was a fun meeting. This was our visioning, where do we want to be type meeting. We got to dream. We learned about emerging trends and best practices in educational facility design at that meeting. We learned what it meant to be a 21st century educational facility. And there are unique attributes that we learned that night that belong to educational facilities that have evolved in response to changes in teaching and in learning. We learned that form should follow function, and that learning spaces will tell you what you can do with them to the benefit of our kids. We also engaged in a really fun word exercise that day. Question number 1 in this wordle that we asked participants: How would a visitor describe our facilities in one word? And number 2 illustrates, how would you like a visitor to describe our facilities? So what we have here on the screen is an interesting summary of where people see us now, that is at the top of the screen, and where they would like us to go in terms of District 117 facilities. The second exercise that night revealed the community's top attributes for future facilities. Number 1 among our public was to create an engaging educational environment, to create enhanced technology access, and to provide an environment to maximize student services. Once people understood what that meant, that proved to be extremely popular. Facilitation team meeting number 4 took place 2 weeks later. There, our committee summarized input from CES number 2, and we began the development of scenarios for consideration. We started by brainstorming all kinds of different ideas. We wanted in that meeting to consider all the possibilities that a reasonable person would imagine. And we came up with 21. They were each different, and they went from soup to nuts, essentially from status quo to pie in the sky, let's have it all type dreaming. We did a great job, and I can pat myself on the back as well as all the members of our committee for leaving no stone unturned here. We presented a wide range of options for consideration, and I think we were fair in providing and coming up with almost any kind of scenario that you could imagine. At Facilitation Team Meeting number 5, in a very quick turnaround, we reviewed the architect's projected costs and configurations of those 21 scenarios. We removed the weakest performers and culled that list down to 11 that warranted further review. After all, this process, at its very root, besides being citizen-led, is data-driven. There's nothing subjective about this component of the program. At Community Engagement Session number 3, which took place in March, we presented those scenarios to the community. And that community who were present weighed in on issues to be considered in our ultimate development of a plan. It was then that elements of a common ground solution began to emerge. Although there was plenty of feedback to support a variety of differing approaches, the seeds of a common ground solution began to reveal themselves at this point through the various information gathering activities that were undertaken during this phase. It was here that the school district, via Steve, outlined the funding approaches that could be taken. Everybody remember the pie analogy? That will live in memory. 1% sales tax was thrown out there. We were informed that that could, over 20 years, generate up to $24 million in funding. Property tax. A modest increase could generate up to $52 million over that same 20-year bond period. And the other major component was a combination of those two funding mechanisms. One of the first areas of common ground to emerge regarded possible project funding. While one effort we undertook identified a combination of property tax increase and sales tax as the preferred approach, the other showed no support at all for a property tax increase. But both efforts indicated that the sales tax was an acceptable approach. Similar to the effort to identify funding preferences, the preference for grade level implementation evolved from a combination of inputs. One source of input identified elementary, followed by middle, with high school being last, as the preferred order of implementation for facilities improvement. The other source identified middle as the desired grade alignment. Addressing needs at grades 6 7, and 8 was the common ground of those differing input sources. Scenarios that received further consideration from the committee at this point were those with the highest cost-benefit analysis results. As I mentioned before, this process was data-driven and objective. And to take us into the public opinion data survey results, I'll ask Mike to come back, take us through that.
Thank you, Mary, and Debbie, I apologize if I called you Kathy at the beginning. We decided during one of our meetings that, yes, we've had an incredible turnout at the community engagement sessions, that maybe we needed to reach further than just the individuals that were coming to join us. And so we had some private funding and did a public opinion poll, a phone poll. The phone poll, the survey, had 300 individuals in our area and got responses from those 300. They made more calls than that, but that was the sampling. 300 is what we went for. And from that phone survey, several things resonated, and that's what we're going to highlight for you here on the screen with this report. The first one was about the junior high, and question number 8 up on the screen. Which of the following options would you prefer in regards to the junior high school? The construction of a new Turner Junior High School or making additions and upgrades to the current junior high school building? And as you can see, 53% said a total prefer additions and upgrades to the current junior high. And as we were talking to the architects and contractors through BLDD, the realization came to us that, you know what, in this day and age, remodeled is about the same as new when it comes to the quality when the project is said and done. The next question that we asked was about middle school. Jacksonville School District 117 operates 6 elementary schools that are K through 6 and 1 junior high school, grades 7 and 8. If it were cost effective, would you favor or oppose changing the grade K through 5 elementary schools and have 1 grade 6 through 8 middle school? And look at the results. I will also say that at the meeting after this phone survey, we asked, how many of you in this room actually received this phone call? 2 or 3. So we did reach many individuals. Some of them even said, there was 14 questions. Some of them even had mentioned they were unaware of anything that was going on. Some of them said, we are aware, but they haven't participated. So we are grateful that the phone survey gave us some results that we are now using to help guide us through this vision. The next question was about bond proposal. To finance the facility improvements, Vision 117 is considering a possible $30 million bond proposal to be placed on the November ballot. If the election were held today, would you be voting yes in favor of the bond proposal or no against it? And look at those results. Now that's astounding. Now you won't be surprised when I tell you that the next question was an explanation of what it's going to cost you as the homeowner on your property taxes, and then that kind of switched. So we very well knew that even at one of our community engagement sessions, the overwhelming response was a combination, sales tax and bond referendum. But the phone survey clearly demonstrated that the a bond referendum to increase sales taxes would not be favorable to the community. In question number 13, a different option being considered for funding the facility improvements is a 1% sales tax countywide. If the election were held today, would you be voting yes in favor of the tax or voting no against it? 63% of the respondents said yes, they would favor a sales tax increase to fund. Based on all the input, the facilitating team reached consensus on recommendations to bring to community engagement session number 4, and that was, we decided that maybe we ought to consider phasing in a master plan, which is what, as far as a strategic plan for the district, a master plan. Maybe we should do it in phases. Start with the November sales tax election in November of 2014, and if it's successful, then re-engage the community to develop phase 2 and provide opportunity for subsequent bond election in the next 2 to 5 years. So again, the thought was this phase, once we get through the election, create a new facilitation team committee to study what do we do for the next phase. Basically, our conclusions were that the best plan for our future would be a plan that creates a great long-term value and a plan that can be supported by the community. A plan should be implemented in phases, and if the community supports the implementation, we start this process again. And now for some conclusions from community engagement session number 4, I'll send it back to Mary.
And I'll just reiterate some of what Mike said. We felt as a committee that it was important to reach out and test what we were finding through our community engagement systems or meetings, and to determine and help us to know if we were on the right track. So that telephone polling has proved to be invaluable in us, and it gives us the utmost confidence as we have proceeded through this process, through the decision that we will deliver tonight. At community engagement session number 4, group conclusions were presented with the goal of filling in the remaining undefined components of the plan. Up to that point, the preferred scenarios had evolved from the original 21 concepts that were brainstormed by the Facilitation Committee back in February to the 7 scenarios that yielded the strongest cost-benefit analysis. The decision regarding funding had been reached, establishing $24 million basically as the project budget for Phase 1. This was based upon what could be reasonably expected to be yielded from a 1% countywide sales tax. Now it was time to determine the components of a Phase 1 plan. The options that were presented that night were vetted through 4 different filters, if you will. In other words, options A through E all fit within the funding boundary that was set, $24 million. Each option had been generated through the community engagement process. A component of one of the 7 final scenarios had been exposed to public assessment and input. That was integral to it being included in this phase, and it had to have been supported by the public opinion polling that took place. Now for a more thorough description of those options, we have the next slide. Option A was to build a new 7-8 building on the Turner site. Option B was to do a 21st century remodel of Turner while maintaining it as a 7-8 center. Option 3 was complete renovation at Turner. And as a Latin major, I'm happy to tell you that renovate means to make new. So you're essentially using the bare bones of what you've got there and reconfiguring it for 21st century standards. And an additional component of option C was to add square footage to accommodate the entire district's 6th grade population. Option D was a brand new K through 5 center for 750 students. Option E was a 21st century renovation to Jacksonville High School. During that night, when the various committees table groups that reported out, it became evident early on that a clear favorite existed. And I think it's rather graphically shown here. Option C, heads and tails and shoulders and feet and toes and fingers, everything above all the rest. It ranked highest in all the following rubric metrics. It was equitable. There was optimal grade alignment. Folks there felt that it adequately maximized student services. It was financially effective. It was 21st century education ready. It provided value to the community, and it was an extremely feasible option. For those reasons, it was the overwhelming favorite, I think, of the folks who were at CES number 4. While it might not have been everyone's first choice or dream choice, clearly it was a choice that everybody there and throughout the community, we felt through our data input collection, could be supported. It was the common ground that we were searching for through this process. At Facilitation Team Meeting 8 last month, based upon the input from CES number 4, the Facilitation Committee met, considered information gathered during the entire process, and we crafted our recommendation. While the data strongly pointed to an achievable consensus, at that meeting we asked tough questions, engaged in very robust discussion. We thoroughly vetted that this really was an achievable plan that could succeed in this community. What emerged from this entire process was a decision that's being recommended to you unanimously by your committee. And here, with that recommendation for your consideration, I'll invite Mike back up to the podium.
The recommendation that's being made to the Board of Education from the Vision 117 Facilitation Review Committee is to implement a long-range plan for 21st century learning, to proceed with a phased approach, to put on the November 2014 ballot a sales tax referendum of 1%, to proceed with option C for Phase 1, which again is the addition and renovation of Turner Junior High, and then to re-engage the community before Phase 2. As a reminder, option C is a 6th grade addition, creating a 6th, 7th, 8th grade middle school. It also would include comprehensive upgrades to meet code requirements and address needed capital improvements, infrastructure upgrades. 21st century renovation of existing facilities to create flexibility and convertibility. And in creating the the 6 through 8 Jonathan Turner kindergarten would then return to their home elementary schools, and then preschoolers would move into the central office.
Given all the variables that were considered during this engagement process and program, it's our unanimous opinion that option C is that common ground that our community can support. There are some wonderful outcomes to be realized if we push forward with option C. It benefits the entire community. Oops. There we go. We're in sync again. No site acquisition is required. And the site is centrally located. It's beautifully located through the most heavily traveled highway or byway in our community. It's a component of all of the highest performing scenarios in our data models. It was the preferred grade alignment on our opinion survey. It has the benefit of allowing kindergartners to go back to their home schools. It allows pre-K children to attend at central office, which is very well suited for that particular level. As a positive for both students and staff, it allows more time together at a 6 through 8 center. There is possible 6th grade participation in fine arts and athletics should we consolidate at that level. It's a vast improvement over our status quo. Option C also leaves money to invest in our remaining buildings as we work through this long-range plan to bring 21st century educational improvements to these facilities. Our project cost for option C is $21.6 million, leaving us ample wiggle room to provide those maintenance expenditures. And With this renovation and addition, it will be functionally equivalent to a new building at the least cost. As with any plan, there are some concerns. I see Steve looking at his watch, so I will hurry up here. Construction in this particular scenario will be required to be phased while students are on site. But our experts and consultants tell us that that is something that is routinely planned for in such projects. With careful planning, this should not interfere with instruction and learning. And in fact, those on-site construction activities create additional teaching opportunities. Just imagine the STEM work that you can do while this is going on. It does, of course, incorporate a slight increase in operating costs while we're undergoing this, but the additional capacity in this building will allow the school district to absorb an enrollment increase in future growth. There is increased student enrollment on a limited size site, but we feel quite strongly that the reconfigured site can handle the additional student population. Overall, we feel that the concerns that were raised can be managed effectively. And so we can wholeheartedly leave you with this unanimous recommendation from our committee. And I'd like to close, if you will forbear here, with a few words that I raised at our last facilitation team meeting. Disturb us when we are too well pleased with ourselves, when our dreams have come true because we have dreamed too little, when we arrive safely because we sailed too close to shore. Disturb us when with the abundance of the things that we possess, we have lost our thirst for life. Stir us to dare more boldly, to venture on wider seas, where storms will show mastery, where losing sight of land, we shall find the stars. We ask to extend the horizons of our hopes and to push us into the future in strength, courage, hope, generosity, and love. Thank you.